What is porn? What does that mean? Like, what does it mean, porn?
Right, explicit.
Like, porn is nudity, but what about all the erotic images that are in society that can be on billboards? They're meant to stimulate. They're meant to be titillating sexually. That's the idea of the picture. And they do. I didn't start with porn. I started with catalogs, the lingerie sections and catalogs that came through the mailbox in my house, the same ones that my mom and sisters were shopping from for their clothing. But there's a reason they put them in there. I was a sports fanatic, so I subscribed as a teenager to Sporting News and Sports Illustrated, and once a year the swimsuit edition showed up. Right, it's part of our society and culture in one form or another. Right, the sexualization of people, the sexualization of women, and at this point, I just assume that, I won't go in necessarily too far. As you saw at the beginning of this conversation, I asked, how far I should go with it, but I certainly assume from a porn perspective that someone is dealing with it. And then, my approach always is, if it's working for someone, God bless. Right.
Meaning if it's not turning into an addiction.
No, it's not turning into
What do you mean
addiction.
by working?
Like, I'm not here to I'm not here to take a moral stand on
and say no
pornography.
one.
Not that I don't have a moral position on it. I'm saying that that's not my role. That's not my job, is to take a moral stand on it. My job, I'm looking at it for those people who it's not working for. Can they talk about it? Can they get out of it? For those who already decided that it's not, I want to free the person who's already in the prison but isn't comfortable, meaning who already recognizes in the prison.
Right.
Right. And there are so many people like this. I can't tell you how many people, young, 15, 16, 17 years old, have reached out to me and said, like, I want to stop watching porn. I don't know how. And unfortunately, a lot of the messages, and this is where I think that if we don't understand what's really going on, a lot of us get it wrong. So obviously, you have the occasion, right, the glimpse and all of that stuff, right, that someone who sees an attractive woman or sees an attractive picture, they're going to look. But when we talk about someone who's going there for it or watching pornography on a regular basis, very often they don't want to be there, or very quickly they don't want to be there. There is a sense of shame or a sense of innocence that gets eroded, and pornography is not. I mean, it's graphic, and it gets very, very graphic very quickly, and a lot of it's harsh, and it takes an adjustment to be able to even
consume.
Correct. It's not. It's like watching the UFC. Right. The first time you see someone punch in the face, you're like, "What?" You turn away.
You do.
Right. The same is true with a lot of this pornography, and a lot of young kids have seen this stuff. They tried doing a study on the effects of pornography on the teenage mind. I don't know if you've come across this.
Yeah.
And they weren't able to find a control group.
Right.
They did not have.
Yeah.
They didn't have. For those, you need to understand what a control group is. A control group is people who've never seen porn. Right. You have to.
Right. They're nothing to compare to.
Nothing to compare to. We didn't know how someone was affected because we don't know anyone who has it.
Right. So what age do you think we need to start talking about this with our kids?
I can't say from the religious community, but I think the average age is between about 8 and 10 that most kids get exposed to it.
Right. I think we saw 10. Right.
10 too.
We were looking up some stats last night, and we saw 10 as an age that a lot of kids are exposed.
That's when kids try to look for. That's when.
That's what it said. It
said they can be shown by someone else, an older kid, as well.
Right.
Right.
Maybe a 13-year-old kid shows an 8-year-old. The first time I saw an image of sex was a kid a couple years older than me who had just learned about it and showed it to me in an encyclopedia and showed me some pictures of a book in his parents' house. So it can start then, but at that point, when I was 8, it was 1993. Right. Now you have a smartphone. I mean, it's a completely different world. But what I was saying earlier was that very often when people reach out to me, and it's often after they've reached out to someone, maybe a rebbe in their yeshiva or a parent or something else, and oftentimes the instruction, especially from those of us who are more religious, is one of religious or moral opinion. Like, that's not okay. Like, do you understand what? They'll learn Shulchan Aruch with them on how bad it can be, or so on and so forth.
And that builds the shame.
Very often it can build the shame. And I'm thinking of a story a few months ago. I had a conversation with Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, which went back and forth.
3-hour conversation. I did listen to it.
Went back and forth on the name, and he actually advertised it in both ways. In some areas, he called it the shame of porn addiction, and some of his, his followings, different communities, he felt like even that may be too harsh. He called it shame of addiction. And we had a conversation around this, and after that, someone reached out to him saying that he was a teenager, and he said that he's really been struggling, and he feels like Rabbi Jacobson is his last hope. So Rabbi Jacobson forwarded me the email, and he says, "What would you say in this situation?" And I said, if I get an email like that, I get on the phone with him. So he said, "Can I pass him on to you?" So I said, "Sure." So I speak to this kid, and I think, if I remember his story correctly, I think he had become frum or more frum when he was a teenager. But at that point in time, he had already, when he was like 13 or 14, I think at this point he was maybe 17 or 18, and he had already been exposed to pornography at that age, and he came across a video on YouTube, he said at about 14 years old, of a Sephardic rabbi talking about Shmiras HaBris, or whatever the language they use in that community for it is, and just ridiculously harsh. And he said the shame he felt, he felt so useless after watching that video that it's kind of stuck with him since. And over the years, every single time he's slipped into porn, that video has he's reminded of what this guy said, and just very harsh, very judgmental. And I don't think it came from a bad place. He just thought, maybe I'll scare this kid from going. Well, that's great if our way of getting pornography was going to a corner bodega and pretending we're 18. But now it's in your face, literally.
Right. Basically, what you're saying is that we need a certain, we need to advance the education and how we treat folks who are struggling with this.
Right. The fear aspect is not going to work.
No, because they're going to hit it. Right. They're going to get there at some point. So that fear and shaming, instead of preventing them from going there, the question is they're most likely there in some capacity, right? So if someone has gone there once, what do we want our message to be at that point?
Right. So
when I spoke to him on the phone the first time, he kept referring to himself as disgusting.
Wow.
And I said, why disgusting? Like, what are you watching? So he's like, looking at what? You're looking at beautiful pictures of beautiful people. Like, what is, you may not want to do it. I'm not saying you should do it, but what's disgusting about this? Like, this is normal. It's a normal human drive.
It's instinctual.
He is disgusting. And he said that every rabbi he's spoken to, well-meaning and well-intentioned, just turned it on him. And how disgusting it is, how negative, and the punishments and everything else. I'm like, it's not disgusting. I said it's a very healthy drive that you want to channel towards something.
Right.
You don't want to be with your wife and eventually you get married. You don't want to be with your wife and not be engaged and interested and right. What you don't want is for that energy to be spritz all over the place, for lack of a better word, but you don't want to get rid of it. It's not a disgusting thing.
Right. It's just uncontrolled. That's at the moment.
Correct. And he had a really hard time with what I was saying, but how can you say this? And he had all the quotes and all the rules that were being violated and everything else. And in the conversation with Robert Jacobson, this is a lot of where we went. Mm-hmm. But one thing's for sure is that messaging, while it may have worked in the 1950s or 1850s or at some point in time, I don't know if it worked or didn't, today's day and age where so many of
the exposure rate is so high, that messaging
much more compassion
may not work.
Yeah, you've gone there, okay, and now you don't want to, so let's support him. Let's build him up
and give him the tools or her the tools to be able to, recognize that there is people that have done this before, and there are ways to be able to avoid doing that.
Yep.
I like that you said her, by the way, because there are women who deal with this. It's not only a men's issue.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Do women ever reach out to you?
Yes. Yes.
The numbers are not as high, but
no, but
it's
there's
still
an
there.
additional level of shame that exists for sure. And I don't usually go too far down the path, but there are a couple women I know, like in the conversations, but there are a couple women I know who've worked on themselves in this regard, and I'll refer to speak to them. But in this case, where I ended the conversation with him was I said, when after you're watching porn, you heard a Musar speech on YouTube. Every time you went to anyone afterwards, you've gotten a Musar speech. So now every time you watch porn, you get a Musar speech. So let's try something else, right? I'm going to give you a chizuk speech, right? I said, to me, I'm very impressed at 18 years old, 17, 18 years old, that you even care about stopping. It wasn't until 10 years later in my life when I was already hurting other people, right? When my wife or girlfriend at the time felt somewhat betrayed by what I was doing, or maybe not somewhat, felt betrayed by what I was doing. That's where I was. That's what took to get my attention. This kid's 18 years old. I'm like, I'm inspired by you.
Right. It takes a lot of guts.
The fact that you care about this, the fact that you're paying attention, you want to change, you want to be better, like, you're a hero. Like, you're the best guy in the world. So I said, when's the last time you watched? Before this last time you fell? Like, went like 2 weeks. I'm like, 2 weeks is freaking amazing. Like, so at the end of the conversation, he was having a hard time with it. Like, how can you say it? I was nichshel, and he had all the language. And I said, I have a question for you. At the end of the conversation with me, are you more likely to watch porn or less likely to watch porn? Right now, how are you feeling today? You feel less likely to watch porn today or more likely? I said, less likely. I said, after you replay one of those Musser speeches in your head, more likely to watch porn or less likely? He said, more likely. So that's all you got to know. So he said, so I should lie to myself so I don't watch porn? Whatever. So, okay, clearly we need another conversation, right, to undo the Musser speeches. But that's the main message I would have in answer to your question, is we need a much more compassionate message, and we can't be scared of what we're offering.